And here he is, the man himself, Kris Kobach. Great to see you this morning, sir, the GOP nominee for governor in Kansas. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you, Ed.
I happened to be anchoring on Saturday night leading up to this rally, and one of the things that caught my ear, in addition to the talk of Justice Kavanaugh, is that you really put illegal immigration front and center. And it seems to me, I spend most of my time in Washington, Republican leaders in Washington, forget about the Democrats for a second, Republican leaders in Washington don't seem to be following through on that.
You know, it's disappointing, especially on the wall. You know, building the wall is such an elementary, obvious thing we need to do to secure our border. And yet you have Democrats who are now saying don't build the wall and don't even fund ICE. It's ridiculous. But, you know, I think every time we have an election, politicians in Washington and at gubernatorial level, as is the case here in my race, are reminded where voters are on this. And voters want our border secured, and they want to stop giving welfare benefits to illegal aliens, which is an issue in my state race.
Well, let's talk about your state and your race. Democrat Laura Kelly, the polls I've looked at suggest that this is neck and neck. It's 1 point either way. This is supposed to be Kansas, a pretty red state. Obviously, there were some House races the president was also campaigning on that are closer, I think, you'd have to admit, than the GOP would want them. So are Democrats right that there's some kind of a blue wave out there that might impact even a state like Kansas as well?
I don't think the blue wave is as big as they predict. In Kansas, we do have a history of going back and forth between Republican and Democrat governors for the last 50 years. That's why, of course, Kathleen Sebelius, who was Obama's HHS secretary, came from the governor's office in Kansas. There is certainly, as there is historically, every time the second year into a president's new presidency, there's usually the opposition party has a little bit of a boost. But I think what you're seeing in Kansas is that boost is starting to be mitigated, especially by President Trump's visit and by the intense frustration Americans have about the Kavanaugh hearing.
Let's talk about the Trump effect first, and then we'll get to Kavanaugh, which is that I was covering Ron DeSantis a few weeks back down in Florida, and he was way behind in the GOP battle for the nomination for governor in the Sunshine State. He gets the president behind him, and there's a, multi-digit swing. The president's rally for you, is that the kind of movement you'd like to see as well in the days ahead?
Oh, absolutely. Who wouldn't, right? I mean, there's no denying it. President Trump has a kind of an electricity and an ability to campaign for others that past presidents haven't had. Past presidents didn't fill huge arenas with 11,000 people when they're coming in to campaign for somebody else, as in my case. So there's no question he has electrified the people, the voters in Kansas, and hopefully it will produce a boost. But we'll see. Let's
talk about the Kavanaugh effect that you mentioned as well, because if we were having this conversation, say, 10 days ago, it might be, boy, conservatives are a little bit deflated. Their nominee is getting battered. There were some Republican leaders maybe not pushing back hard enough. And then we see it turn. We see Democrats perhaps overplaying their hand to the point that Kavanaugh is confirmed. But, sir, did they also overplay their hand to the point that now conservatives in your state and others are frustrated that Democrats went so low that maybe in November they're going to turn out in big numbers?
Yeah, I'd use a stronger word than frustrated. I'd say they're angered. And let's remember one other thing, Ed, and that is that one of the things that was maybe the third-tier issue or second-tier issue in 2016 that motivated voters was the Supreme Court of the United States. We had that open seat on the Supreme Court. Constitutionalist, conservative Americans all around the country said, hey, we can't risk this going to someone Hillary Clinton would put on the court. There's something similar going on today. People are really worried about protecting our Constitution. And so when they saw what the Democrats were going to do, that worried people, and I think it'll motivate them.
Kris Kobach, we appreciate you coming in this morning.
My pleasure.